This is 9 News with Georgie Gardner.
Good evening. We begin with shock news just in. Former ALP leader Simon Crean has died suddenly while on a business trip overseas. For more, we're joined by Reid Butler in Melbourne. Reid, Simon Crean was a giant of the Labor Party and, not surprisingly, both sides of politics are tonight paying tribute.
Yes, Georgie, over 4 decades, Simon Crean was a critical figure, first in the union movement and then in the Labor Party. Serving as Victoria's member for Hotham in the federal parliament, he briefly served as Labor leader in the early 2000s and as a minister in 4 Labor governments: Hawkes, Keatings, Rudds and Gillards, before bowing out of politics in 2013. He was born here in Melbourne. His father was Frank Crean, who was also a big figure in the Labor Party, serving as Deputy PM under Gough Whitlam. The reports tonight are that Simon Crean died of a heart attack while on a hike in Germany on a business trip. He's being remembered tonight for his intellect and his gentle nature. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, leading tributes, describing Simon Crean as a man of great humour, a thoroughly decent human being, and that won him respect across the political spectrum. And speaking to that point, opposition leader Peter Dutton has also paid his respects, tweeting a short time ago, "Simon was a gentleman to deal with and a giant of the Labor movement." He's survived by his wife Carol and 2 children. Georgie, Simon Crean was 74.
Reid Butler in Melbourne, thank you. Social media giants are set to receive massive fines if they consistently fail to remove fake news from their platforms. The federal government has released draft legislation detailing its crackdown, which includes greater powers for the communications watchdog.
Burning, 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 burning. 5G tower.
As COVID spread around the world, so did an online conspiracy, wrongly linking 5G to the virus.
The UK has reported around 50 fires targeting towers and other 5G equipment.
Phone towers in Australia also targeted, highlighting the potential danger of false information.
People actually interfered with that infrastructure, which can be terribly harmful.
The Communications Minister today pushing ahead with a plan to crack down on harmful mistruths and the digital platforms that allow them to spread.
This is an important step to keep all Australians safe.
Misinformation is, fake information, whether that's text, pictures, video, audio, that gives a false narrative to try to change someone's perception in a negative way.
Under proposed new laws, search engines, social media platforms, dating websites and online marketplaces could be hit with fines of between nearly $3 and $7 million, or up to 5% of their global turnover, whichever's highest, if they fail to properly tackle disinformation. And for the first time, the communications watchdog could demand access to digital providers' documents related to fake news.
It will essentially mean that the regulator is able to look under the hood of what the platforms are doing.
They simply don't have the infrastructure to deal with these issues in real time.
We want to ensure that whatever the government does here, that it doesn't restrict legitimate freedom of expression in Australia.
This is not about regulating free speech.
The digital industry group, which represents Google, Twitter and other big tech, says it's committed to improving the way disinformation is managed and will now review the draft bill, which is open for public consultation. Labor's hoping to get it through Parliament by the end of the year. Fiona Willan, 9 News.
The Wagner military group is tonight making its retreat from Russia, withdrawing from the doorstep of Moscow and a region in the country's south. The near mutiny was called off after a deal was struck with the Belarusian president in which the rebel leader will avoid any criminal charges.
Leaving the Rostov-on-Don military compound he'd taken over 12 hours earlier, Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin shakes hands after announcing a stunning backdown. Under a deal brokered by the Belarusian president, Prigozhin will now move to Belarus and be spared from Russian prosecution. Wagner troops celebrating in the streets. Smiling and cheering, but not for the outcome many expected. Their tanks used as props by locals before many began to withdraw, Russia pulled back from the brink of civil war after an extraordinary day. Just hours earlier, the arms rebellion had surged forward within 200 kilometres of Moscow. When their convoy moved through the city of Voronezh, civilians captured the closest of calls for this Russian helicopter. A missile whizzing past and exploding, crew on board letting off flares as they came under attack. Nearby, a large fuel tank bursts into flames, a fireball erupting in the residential area. There was a blast. "I'm scared," this child cries. More than 100 firefighters responding. A convoy of armoured vehicles seen on the main motorway heading north, with claims they busted through trucks placed across the road as barricades. Military roadblocks appeared on the outskirts of the capital in preparation for the Wagner arrival, with thousands of Putin-loyal Chechen soldiers hot on Wagner's tail. Rostov in the country's south had been the first to have its military facilities captured. Heavily armed paramilitary in the streets, one wearing a toy, perhaps to calm local children. It's bad, there should not be military, armed people in the city, this man says. That military now leaving, the roadblocks filled in. But the instability it's created is unlikely to be cleaned up as quickly. President Zelensky calling it complete chaos. The Kremlin maintaining the short-lived rebellion won't impact its Ukrainian offensive.
Europe correspondent Edward Godfrey joins us now. Edward, President Putin lives to fight another day, but the damage done to his image is probably irreversible.
Well, Georgie, this has certainly been the biggest threat to his leadership in more than 2 decades of rule. He has this perception that he is untouchable, but that has certainly been tarnished by this, at least in the eyes of the world. Yevgeny Prigozhin has been a valuable tool to Putin, particularly with his Wagner fighters throughout the Battle of Bakhmut. Putin has been backing him for a long time. But to see this suddenly flip and then Putin have to fend off this possible coup, that has certainly damaged his reputation. So Prigozhin now moves to Belarus, free of any punishment from all this, if you believe the Kremlin. The big question is what happened behind the scenes to cause this sudden about-face? And Georgie, what lasting effect might this have for the Russian leader?
And how is this surprise rebellion playing out on the world stage?
We know that world leaders, particularly Ukraine's allies, are always watching very closely, but even this seemed to catch many of them out by surprise. We know here in London that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak attended an emergency cabinet meeting yesterday as this was all unfolding. He then joined a phone hookup with the US President Joe Biden, French President Emmanuel Macron and the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to discuss the unfolding situation, after which they reiterated their support for Ukraine. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky referred to this as complete chaos. Of course, the war continues to rage on. Yesterday was another deadly day of battle that was sadly overshadowed by the extraordinary events unfolding in Russia. Leaders will be paying very close attention over the coming hours and days to see if there are any changes and if this does turn out to be a significant turning point throughout the course of this war. Georgie?
All right, Edward Godfrey in London, thank you. He's due to face court this week over alleged visa